June 8th. I'm going to call the Economic Development Commission meeting to order.
July 13th.
Oh, July 13th. Oh my gosh. July 13th, 2017. My apologies. One cup of coffee. Has anybody had a chance to look at the minutes?
I would move the approval of the minutes of June 8th.
Do you have a second of that?
Second.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion carried. Next item on the agenda is the discussion of Deepwater Wind Solar proposal and the letter from First Selectwoman Lisa Hebner. I will be recusing myself, and Dave Moore is going to take over this part of the conversation, and you'll call me back in.
I will definitely
I
do
Well,
am
you mean
ready.
you're actually leaving?
I have to leave. Yes.
Oh.
I'm not going far, Tom.
Okay.
Okay. This next item on the agenda is a result of a letter that was sent by the Town First Selectwoman and follow-up letters thereafter. On July 3rd, the First Selectwoman sent a letter asking the various towns and boards to evaluate the Deepwater wind solar proposal that is currently before the Siting Council for the state of Connecticut. There was a follow-up letter from Mr. Cook dated July 7th that indicates that the towns and commissions who are being asked for comments on the Deepwater project do so by July 31st. That is somewhat of a tall order, particularly for those commissions like, for instance, Planning and Zoning, who do not normally meet
Right.
that often during the summer. The problem that I foresee relative to what the EDC can or should do is that it is also a truncated time period. Plus, has anyone actually had a chance to look at the petition that was provided?
What?
Yes.
The reason why I ask is it's a 1,200-page petition.
Mm-hmm.
The first 70 pages of which are the actual itself.
Is that what this link is to that
That is-
petition?
that is,
It
yeah.
literally is 12?
Yes, well, there's multiple exhibits. The exhibits take up most of the verbiage that has been presented. It's the first 70 pages that are the actual gist of what Deepwater is attempting to do.
There's no summary, the executive summary that's available?
No.
Okay.
What the Deepwater wind solar proposal is seeking is permission, is essentially a declaratory statement or determination by the Siting Council that they don't have to provide the site with a particular environmental study. And the reason why the proposal is about 1,200 pages is that the exhibits are intended to show the Siting Council why they don't have to file the environmental study that would normally be required under the Siting Council's rules. The reason why this is particularly of interest to the town of Simsbury is that because it is a petition that is being made to the Siting Council, none of the town boards and commissions, and particularly not the planning, not the zoning commission, not any of the planning and use commissions have any say in any of this. Essentially, the Siting Council can plunk a project right down in the middle of the center of town if they thought that it was an appropriate thing to do.
And no design review board
None.
review either?
None. What has happened is the Board of Selectmen authorized the first Selectwoman to petition the Siting Council to be made a party. That petition has been filed. It is entirely possible, if it hasn't been ruled on already, that the Siting Council will grant that petition. What that means is that the town then will have a full party status in the siting council's consideration of the project, essentially from start to finish. This is why the first selectwoman made the request to the town boards and commissions for, come on in, Jay, for comment. Unfortunately, it's also calling upon us to wade through 1,216 pages of the actual petition to waive the environmental study.
Excuse me, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes.
Could we just quickly
Sure.
bring Jay up to date?
Thank you.
The first agenda item that we're discussing is the discussion recommendation of Deepwater Wind Solar Proposal. Our chairperson, Kristen, has recused herself for personal reasons, and she's not participating, so Dave is chairing this discussion, and so far he has told us that there's a 1,200-page document that reviews this whole project. The first select woman has asked boards and commissions to discuss and take a position on this proposal, this Deepwater Solar proposal. And so we're beginning our discussion of that particular issue.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
And we are asked to make a comment by on or before July 31st.
Yeah. So there's a time pressure. It's a comment in support of the town of Simsbury's request to be a party to the...
The town of Simsbury is now about to become officially a party to the siting council's review of the general petition, and also in particular their specific petition asking the siting council to waive a particular environmental study that would be otherwise required for projects of this size for electronic generation.
Okay, so as a commission, what is our goal today with this agenda item?
Whether or we would want to have a special meeting to further review things, or whether or not the commission would be authorizing the acting chair to respond to the first select woman's request for comment by July 31st.
So the options for this commission for today's meeting is to decide whether or not to have a special meeting for further discussion, or to delegate you as vice chair to express a view on the project on our behalf.
Correct.
Before July 31st.
Correct.
Why is there a July 31st deadline on all this?
It is because my understanding is that that's when the town is going to start formulating a specific response as a party to the petition that is before the siting council to waive the environmental. They normally, once they have filed their application, parties would have 45 days to respond to the application. The filing was made on June 29th, but they have since also filed, in addition to the general petition, a specific petition to waive the environmental study.
Which resets the 45-day clock on everything, or just with respect to the additional petition?
With it just adds to the town, the onus on the town as a potential party to respond appropriately.
So the additional petition gets lumped into the original filing,
Correct.
and there's no additional time?
No.
And either this commission has a special meeting to discuss this, or the vice chair has prepares a response. But are we supposed to evaluate the proposal or evaluate the environmental study? What is it that we're being asked to do specifically?
Please.
I think the first select woman is basically looking for any recommendations, feedback, comments that you may have. Just, because the local boards and commissions, as you noted, don't have control, under normal circumstances, what would your evaluation of the project be? What would your feedback be? And it's pretty open-ended, but I think she's looking for specific feedback.
I mean, if they're asking for our opinion on should we agree to a waiver of an environmental study, it sounds like that's one piece of business where the town has to weigh in on, right?
Correct.
So we should probably have an opinion as to whether or not an environmental study for a 200-acre solar facility should be waived.
That would be correct.
And beyond that, that's very specific.
And whether or not we would be supportive of
The project in general.
the project in general.
Well, I would submit that for this commission to make an intelligent review of this project in general, the second point, that we would all have to read that report.
And as I noted earlier, for Jay's edification, it is a 1,216-page document, but it's the first 70 pages that are actually the petition itself. And it sets forth the reasons why done as far as groundwater is concerned, what they would be doing as far as, they contacted the FAA to determine whether or not there would be a problem with a solar panel being near a air facility. The air facility that they were most concerned about was Bradley Airfield. But the FAA has come back and said, no, there would not be a problem. All of that is in the first 70 pages. The subsequent pagination are the exhibits that they have provided to support what is presented in the first 70 pages.
Mr. Vice Chair, I would like to at least table a suggestion, a process suggestion. Because I just got back from vacation last night, and no, I didn't read that petition. I didn't even know it existed, and now that I know it does, and the magnitude of it, and that we've been requested to do something as a responsible commission in town, I would like to have an opportunity to read it and comment on both those points, the environmental study and the view in general, as a member of this commission. And so what I'm wondering is whether there's another alternative, another process alternative. And I don't know if it's legal or not. And the process alternative would be for us individually, on our own personal time schedules, to review that report, that big report, and prepare our own individual views about these two questions and submit them somehow as individual members of this commission, not necessarily as part of a special meeting.
What I believe is being requested of all the boards and commissions is that those boards and commissions provide the Board of Selectmen with a statement on behalf of those boards and commissions. I don't believe that that would preclude individual members of the various boards and commissions from making their own independent statements, but it would not have the weight of the
commission itself.
board or
Unified.
Commission itself.
Got it.
So
Unified comment.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
all right. So there's two pieces: the environmental piece. Now the other on the project itself. Is this just I mean, at this point, because it seems as though it's pretty far down the road that opinions are being sought. Is this a binary? We like it, we don't, or is there any type of opportunity to be a little bit more specific in terms of, in its current form? Perhaps not. However, if you wanted to do it like this, perhaps that would be more palatable. If there were, are there any things that we could add or subtract from whatever is being proposed, or here's the project, do you like it in this form or not?
Yes, Jamie.
Mr. Chairman, I think the question is very poignant to the subject matter before you, because I think this is your opportunity, whether it was a solar farm or a commercial development, to look at the scale and magnitude, the implications of impact, the implications on the financial impact to the town from a revenue generation and taxable standpoint, and also look at the palatability of the scope of the project, to Jay's point, and say, you know, it's not necessarily a yes or no. It could be a no as presented, but a yes if. So given the scale and magnitude, and we discussions a week ago with regards to buffering and landscaping and the aesthetics of the project from Hoskins and County Road and some other abutting properties, that the project perhaps could be more palatable for some of those neighborhoods if it took on a different appearance.
Yes.
So, and there are some actions that it is simply a yes or no
Right.
for them, but if it was a warehouse and it was before zoning, you may look at the warehouse and say, that's great for job creation, that's great for tax revenue, but the aesthetics of that project, we would appreciate it if the view was softened, if it was screened better, and in concert with the economic aspects, bringing of it, we could be more behind it as the EDC Commission.
Well, I would think,
With regards to the environmental, there are referrals being made to multiple committees. So it is going to the Conservation Commission, where in their Inland Wetlands Act and Conservation Act.
Right.
It is going to the Zoning Commission. It just went before the Planning Commission for looking at consistency with the town's plan on conservation and development. Although the Planning Commission did not vote yay or nay, they voted on developing a consensus of some of the issues they have with the project. So they didn't necessarily give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. They kind of shortlisted some of their concerns with regards to consistency with the POC.
well, in terms of the request that's been made of us, the boards and commissions, and there are numerous ones involved in this request from the first selectwoman, perhaps it would be useful if we framed a response that is specific to our mission as a commission. We are not an environmental review commission.
Nope.
We are not a design review board. We're not a neighborhood development. We are an economic development commission. And so I would say that I would only suggest that if we're going to comment, we should comment in terms of our views as to the economic development impact, if any, of this project, and not try to do the work of other boards and commissions.
Herein lies some of what I see as some concerns that we should be aware of. The solar panel farm array would have the potential for generating income for the town by way of taxes. The tax implications, I have heard, and this is not factually based, it is estimated, that it could be anywhere between $100,000 to $200,000. It could even be upwards of $300,000, depending on what the actual value of the equipment would be taxed. The other problem that we have is that the properties that these arrays are being proposed for are a combination of industrial and R40. And that is what has got a number of our neighbors very concerned, because they're in the R40 where this set of solar panels is going to be established. it has an economic impact on them. Whether or not the house prices go up or go down have an impact. That is something that we, as a commission, probably should have some comment on.
Well, in that regard, just related to what you've just said, and this is for clarification, that particular piece of land, it just occurred to me that one thing we might examine is whether or not that is the highest and best use of that land from an economic development standpoint. And I only raise that question as to whether or not we would take a position that, okay, it's going to produce so many hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue, but it's going to tie up that property for a very, very long time. What is it, 20 years?
Yep, 25
years. And that, as a commission, do we worry that is tied up, not producing very much income, when there might be a higher and better use of that property from the standpoint of economic development? I don't know what the zoning situation is.
Yeah, I think there's a couple questions. There's, first of all, how do you determine what the value of that land is? If you're talking it's simply the equipment, well, you've got depreciation schedules, and after a certain amount of time, it ain't worth that much anymore. If you're talking about the net present value of the cash flows that are being generated with this equipment, it's a completely different story. So if you're saying, okay, you've got 200 acres, you're putting a whole bunch of solar panels on, and we're going to tax it, how is that tax calculated? Is it the income producing potential? That's one way to tax it. Is it the net asset value of the equipment that's on there? That's another. Two very different bases for taxing a particular piece of property.
So that comment just illustrates the degree of difficulty of this discussion. So far, just in 10 minutes, we've come up with 4 or 5 very specific economic development issues.
Right.
And some of them are complex financially, and we haven't even begun. We can probably think of more. So what I'm wondering is whether or not find rather than to evaluate this project, which requires a tremendous amount of study and a tremendous amount of expertise.
In 2 weeks.
You don't have time, yeah.
Maybe the better input that this commission could give, rather than these general points, is to simply raise a series of concerns and questions that we would like to be addressed in the review process. And this is what Jay has just mentioned is one of them.
Did you guys take public comments?
Typically, no, but under the circumstances, I would certainly open.
Thank you, because I do have to leave, and I applaud you for tackling this because it is significant.
Could you identify yourself?
My name is Laura Nygaard. I live on 4 Kilbourne Farms. I am one of the abutters that's impacted by this property, this proposal. This is significant, and what you're being charged with is significant. And make no mistake, the town has a lot of power in this. You are not powerless. So what the First Selectwoman and the Board of Selectmen is asking you to do is to influence how we influence the process. Although the Siting Council has the authority to make the ultimate decision on whether or not this project should be sited where it's at, the town's opinion about that matters, and it matters a lot. And the town is collecting its opinion through you, so you matter a lot. I applaud you, I thank you. You're right, you've got 2 weeks. This process is so fast, it's almost astounding that they could proceed in such a manner and has such an impact on such a large community. There's 5 non-contiguous parcels of land. This is one of the largest solar facilities ever to be placed in a residential community, ever. You cannot find another one. And it impacts over 15 plus residential communities. There is a net economic benefit to this. You are charged with understanding what that is from your commission's position. So I applaud you. I hear your struggle. I imagine if I was sitting in that chair and wasn't personally as well impacted. We're all personally impacted because we all live in this town. And this town has an economic development, and does this fit within that? It's not always about the dollar. It's about the impact it has overall. So I appreciate you. And with that, I'm going to leave, and I look forward to hearing what you guys decide. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just add one?
Sure.
Sure.
I'm Joe Tracy. I live at 40 Berkshire Way. I'm not in the butter, but I live right next door to the butters. And what I wanted to add to this, what Laura just said, was that the legislature has spoken that this type of project should not be cited in prime farmland, prime forest land in this SB 946 that was just signed by the governor about 2010. So it's kind of a crazy situation that Deepwater has been able to come along, get this thing filed with the Siting Commission 2 days before the end of the month, when this legislation, which is really what the state is saying it wants, gets, they get that approved, they get theirs in. If it was in on the 2nd of July, it wouldn't be accepted, because this is prime farmland, this is prime forest land. I encourage you to come out and look at the land, look at the maps. You look at the maps is one thing, look at the land is another thing. We all will have that opportunity to go for a walk with the Siting Commission on September 12th. And I encourage, someone from this group, like Laura, I applaud you taking this up, because this is really important to the character of Simsbury. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Rapp.
Mr. Chairman, with regard to the reference to the Senate bill,
Yes.
I implore you to read it, because it does not say that you cannot cite these on prime and important farmland. That is not what the legislation says. What the legislation does is it modifies the burden on the applicant. Right now, the assumption is if you build it, there is no implied impact unless someone proves you have an impact. What the Senate bill, in essence, does is it swaps that burden and says if your project is proposed on land that includes prime or important farmland, the assumption will be made that you do have impact, and it is your burden to prove you don't. So that's the primary aspect associated with the Senate. Not a prohibition, because if you look at that, there's a prohibition on solar. Can you build a Lowell's warehouse on prime and important? So you can't build a solar farm, but you can build a Lowell's distribution center. And a Lowell's distribution center, just for every, takes 30 acres of building, dead flat. So it's a mass manipulation of the topography. It's a mass manipulation of the A horizon on a prime and important farmland soil. Right. So just, we can get you either the link to the bill or the language for the bill, so you can do that. With regards to the tax implications, we have run some numbers internally, and our draft number right now, not looking at the income model, but on the asset evaluation, including depreciation, over the 20-year lifespan, 20-year run, is approximately $600,000 a year. That is a valuation of land value of about $26,000 an acre, a little north of 7.75 to 7.8 for land value, or the total acreage of 290 acres. So again, the implications potentially are $12 million over 20 years. Could be north of that, could be south of that, but we kind of took a conservative look. I did, as your Director of Planning and Community Development, as well as the assessor, and our numbers were fairly well aligned.
Is that a net present value, or?
What it does is it takes present value. Again, we really did very conservative kind of straight line analysis. We looked at modest. I think I looked at a 2.5% increase over time. I looked at a stabilization of a mill rate right around 40 versus, and I've had some experience with the power plant aspects, and in most times they look to develop a host community agreement, because when they're doing their financing, they don't want fluctuation in a mill rate. So they may, the simple math would be, if it's a $12 million valuation over 20 years, we would like to work with the town and divide that number by the financing on our project and just do straight line, and we'll write you a check for this. so that when they're doing their financial analysis, this isn't 1.2 million in the first year, and in year 20, $487,000. They're looking for, so again, and 1.2 to 4.48, kind of beginning and end of the
Okay, that's helpful.
Couple
Um,
of things. The Senate bill would not be effective until July 1st. This application was made on June 29th. So as much as we might like to have the additional protection, such as it might be, it is arguable as to whether or not, in fact, it would be applicable because they got the application in before the effective date of the statute. Secondly, the properties that we're talking about are, correct me if I'm wrong, mostly old farmland. We're talking about essential tobacco fields. Whether or not the old tobacco fields have an intrinsic value as agricultural, given the fertilizers that were used to grow tobacco specifically, whether or not there is additional work that would have to be done to bring those fields up to code, if there was going to be any kind of different development of that, that would be something that would be a factor for the Economic Development Commission to consider. The problem is that it is speculation. And we are essentially being asked to work with a whole bunch of speculation in order to come up with any recommendation. So I am not a fan of shooting in the dark. And I think that Commissioner Frank's approach of identifying issues that we would like to have responded to would perhaps be a better use of our time. And if that be the case, do we want to try to develop that now and then authorize me to send a letter to the Board of Selectmen indicating that? Or do we want to table this to a special meeting for its own consideration? I am loath to generate yet another meeting.
Which we might not have a quorum.
Yeah, we may not.
That is the primary reason
Well,
why I'm loath
maybe
to
we
do
should
so.
why don't we talk about this a little more and see how far we get and where we go. I mean, I'll throw out another concern that I have, and that is, so you may have, I think the $600,000 a year, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably does not take into account how the value of a budding residential property would be affected. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
From a study perspective.
So when you're looking at a project, you have to look at it on the net basis. So projects bring positives where they generate revenue, and then they bring negatives where there's some costs associated with this. So one of the costs associated with this project would be a decrease in the value of abutting properties. Now, let's suppose for argument's sake, the $600,000 number is right, and the value of the abutting properties goes down such that it's $100,000 less on the taxable rolls, so you have a net increase of $500,000. Let's assume those numbers are ballparkish. On a project basis, well, okay, maybe that doesn't look so bad. Maybe it looks pretty good. Problem that I have with that analysis is that the economic losses are not being borne uniformly by the town. They're being borne 100% by the people who are abutting the property. So, for example, if they said the average person who sells their house is going to get $32,173,000 less for their house, if they sell it anytime in the next 20 years, and they wrote all those people a check for $32,173, I might be okay. It would be a lot easier to get on board with the project if the people who are suffering, the economic harm are being made whole. And that's, so that's an issue. If it can't be structured like that, they get free electricity in perpetuity and their tax base goes down. I mean, like, if you can't structure some sort of way to make them relatively whole on an economic basis, I mean, given the location of the project, I mean, then it's kind of tough, right? I mean,
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, if I just may, I absolutely understand and respect what the point Jay's making, but from a zoning land use perspective, unless we rezone the entire town residential, it really, that debate could happen with Silverman.
Yep.
$65 million development, which Riverwalk feels they're impacted by it because their view is of a cornfield, so they feel Riverwalk's condominium development will be potentially devalued because it's going next to another housing development. Or their housing, the one next to them's housing.
Right.
Part of the acreage, 75 acres associated with this project, is zoned industrial. If a office complex or something else, we'll say a non-residential project was going in that 75 acres, I'm not sure you would even be having the discussion that new office complex had to compensate the abutting residential property because they're going in there.
Right.
I read an interesting thing the other day where it says, some people choose to live next to the train tracks, some people used to live on a property that is subjectable to flood, some people live next to a school, and the end of the comment, the point was, but I don't choose to. Again, we all have land use decisions, but the analysis will run, I think, will trouble you in the future as you make determinations on other projects if you just do the impact.
True.
To date, we haven't been able to find any literature that states that a solar project has a negative effect on abutting residential property. There is one study, and it's probably skewed towards the solar industry, that says there has appreciated value to the abutters, and their kind of mindset was it gives some certainty to what is next to you for the next 25 to 30 years.
true, although,
A
as
noisy
a point of fact, when
neighbor
those houses were built, they were choosing to live next to a tobacco field, not anything else. But
industrially zoned piece of property in some aspects.
Right.
in some limited aspects, perhaps. But so then it gets to, look. I mean, a solar farm is not the worst thing that could go there. I mean,
Did
clearly,
you say is or
is not the worst thing that could go there. I can think of a lot of things that are worse. However, I don't think that the evaluation should be limited to worse. I mean, we should, if we're gonna, if this is the project that's in front of us, which is this solar farm, and if it is a kind of potentially acceptable use, then it should be maximally so, not minimally so, in that it is the least worst alternative. Because we have an obligation to the people who are abutting the land and who will be impacted to look out for what their interests are, and exactly what that looks like, whether they're compensated or whether it's simply you have a design such that, okay, the way it was proposed, that's clearly not going to work. But if you did these things, I don't know what these things are, then you know what? This is pretty good. I think you kind of got to get on board with
Yes,
this.
but it's not the mission of this commission to look out for the interests of abutting property owners. That's not what this commission is for. This commission has been established for the purpose of promoting and generating economic development. That's the core mission of this commission. And maybe we should include this in our discussion, but it seems to me that the core issue for this commission is what is the highest and best use of that property from the standpoint of economic development going forward. That's the main thing, because that property has value. It has intrinsic value, kinetic value for economic development. And if it is tied up in this form of revenue, economic development for the community, is that the best thing, or are there other alternatives in view that could produce better economic development for the town?
I mean, I take your point to an extent, but our mission has not been economic development at any cost. It's been economic development in keeping with the character of the town, the values of the town. Here are competitive advantages. So, I mean, we've never looked. The idea's never been to look at projects, simply on an NPV of cash flow basis. There have always been other kind of factors that go into the desirability of a project.
That proviso needs to be included.
What worries me about the project in general is Simsbury is known now as a town that is a wonderful residential town. It has a lot of value to offer anyone who chooses to live here. And we're known for that. We're known for that all around the country. What worries me is that will that change, or will then Simsbury be known as the town with the largest solar development, instead of Simsbury, the town that we are? That scares me.
Does it scare
as a
you?
Resident.
Scare you from an economic development standpoint?
In every aspect. In every aspect. I can see the benefit of a solar farm. I can absolutely see it. But I have a lot of trouble personally seeing it where they're putting it, or choose to put it, and the overwhelming issue of how big this solar farm is, and how big it is from a national perspective. I think it's what I heard, the largest. So now all of a sudden, well, let's go to it's not the largest. How close is it?
There's one being proposed in Brooklyn that's 100 megawatts.
How many megawatts is this one?
26 for
It's Brooklyn, Connecticut?
Brooklyn, Canterbury, Connecticut. It's on the siting council petition now, filed in June of 2017.
It's that aspect that worries me.
There's a 20 megawatt one that's under construction in Pomfret. There's a 20 plus megawatt facility under construction in Sprague.
And what kind of properties are those?
Brooklyn farmland, and surrounded by residential, similar to Simsbury. Pomfret is farmland in the flight path of an airport that was approved in 4 months by the siting council. All prime important farmland.
Yep.
So how much does the siting council listen at all to what other folks say?
The siting council has a role. And Bob D. Crescenzo was here to explain. Connecticut's given power through the legislature. A town has no power unless it's given to them by the state. Just backtrack a little bit.
Right.
So the state gave certain legislative powers to municipalities to formulate zoning. And they gave them land use controls. But from that, they retained a few things. And some of those primarily are associated with the location of public utilities and public power generation, power plants. This falls under the power generation. And because it's in a 1 megawatt, it goes to the siting council. And under the siting council, the process isn't a full application to the council. It is an application for a declaratory process. There are environmental evaluations included in this application. It's not like they didn't do it.
Right.
There is an environmental evaluation. It's not to the level of a larger coal-fired power plant or a trash-to-energy plant. That's a slightly different permitting process. This was developed by the state, given the nature of the types of projects they're allowed to go through this process. So a coal-fired plant can't go through this process, but a solar power generator can. The siting council has to look at air quality and water quality impacts. Those are the primary two things. So if a project impacts air quality, they're not going to approve it. If it impacts water quality, they're not going to approve it. And you'll see the basis of the solar applications kind of hone in on the factors that the siting council has to weigh in on. And the decisions they made, I reviewed 4 decisions they made from the solar, and they've had the ability, towns have had the ability to impact the buffering and aesthetics of the project and potentially the impact on some of the environmental issues, vernal pools and wetlands. Some of them, the developers have pulled back a little bit based on the siting council review of the project. So you do have, Laura's comments that you do have the ability to influence the process. And to Jay, I think Jay and Tom, you're on very similar pages, just looking at it differently. That you're looking at the implications of this from a broad perspective on the town, from tax, but not just tax, how it also affects the sense of place for Simsbury, which does have an overall impact on community, and that affects economic development. So you are slowly working through the aspects that I think the selectmen expect you to do that.
Well, on the point of highest and best use of the land.
There will always be a higher and better use than any proposal before you.
Right.
That's a fair point.
Which
Yeah.
is a fair point. That point there? Well, I'll just finish the thought.
Yeah. Sorry, Tom.
It's okay. I'm thinking of the cornfields along Route 10,
Yes.
which are being developed now. And some people like that and some people don't, but it's being done. And to me, it's just a factual thing. To me, it's just about economic development and its numbers. And so if we can establish a metric or a quantitative view that, for example, if that property were developed in the same way that those on Route 10 were developed, where do we get the most money? From a solar farm or residential development, a mixed-use development, on a revenue per acre? To me, it's simple. And the rest of it is for the other boards and commissions to deal with in terms of trying to mitigate the qualitative, the softer aspects of it.
I would note a couple of things. One is if you build a property along a railway, even if the railway is not used, you have to figure out that at some point in time, there's going to be a train going down the tracks. Classic example right now is there is a boat yard in Haddam that is split in two by the Essex Stream Train line. Now, the line hasn't been fully developed through there. The boatyard is going ballistic over the fact that one of the things that's being considered is that the railway would actually be restored all the way up to Middletown, which means no more boatyard, or boatyard with some serious restrictions as far as use is concerned. That has an impact that would be something that the Haddam EDC, if there was such a thing, would have to consider. And you have competing interests. You have a situation here in Simsbury where you have agricultural use, you have industrial use, you have residential use. Some of those are well married together, the agricultural and industrial. Not so much as far as the residential is concerned. As far as whether or not we ought to be concerned about the environmental impact, I would note that if we were dealing with a use that could potentially generate a Superfund site, yeah, I think the EDC ought to be weighing in on that. Whether or not the conversion of the farmland into a solar array generates a situation that requires a certain level of remediation, that's a bit more tangential, but it is still something that the EDC could, within its core mission and purview, speak to. The problem is we don't have that kind of information to be able to say yay or nay.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it would be something that would be incumbent upon us as the Economic Development Commission for the town of Simsbury to say, we understand how residents are concerned about some of the environmental impacts, given the fact that you are going to be near some inlet wetlands and you're also going to be somewhat near the Farmington River. To the extent that there would be a need for any remediation, yes, the EDC would be concerned. I think that would be a fair statement. It's not telling the town what to do. It's not telling Deepwater Wind, Solar what to do necessarily. It's just saying to the siting council, hey, make this a consideration when you are dealing with the approval of this particular project.
David,
Yes, sir.
could you please say that again? No, that means no difference, but I want, also our recording secretary is interested in hearing it again, but I want to make sure I understand, because I have a sense that you're framing a point of view today for this commission, and I think it's vitally important that we all fully understand the nature of this statement that you've made.
I agree with you that we should remain true to our core mission in making any kind of recommendation or presentation to the Board of Selectmen as it considers its presentation to the Siting Council. I would not be too narrow in defining what our core mission is, however, in that where there might be environmental concerns, yes, that has an impact on what the highest and best use is of the 5 parcels that are being considered and or some 2 or 3 specific parcels. I think that the fact that 3 of the 5 parcels have industrial zoning components to it is something to be considered when dealing with the highest and best use. Whether it is the highest and best use is not something that we could necessarily pass on, but we could certainly say, hey, tying up what used to be farmland for the next 25 years, potentially even 50 years, is going to have an impact on how the town is able to tax that place, is able to use that place, and how we would be then charged with trying to develop the economic good of the town of Simsbury around it. So I think that presenting our concerns and presenting that we would like to have the Siting Council to consider would be the approach we could legitimately take. And with that in mind, I pose to the Commission is this something that we want to address today and therefore give me authorization to express that today? Or do we want to take some more time to deliberate and meet again before July 31st? I would suggest before July 29th, which would give me enough time to draft a letter.
Let's just hold that thought for just a second and another process suggestion, because this is kind of difficult under time pressure. We have 4 members of the Economic Development Commission present here.
Right.
I think before I, as one member of the commission, take a position on how we should respond, I'd like to know how each member of this commission here present feels about this project.
Yeah,
Okay.
Let's go down the line.
So let's go down the line. Jay, how do you feel?
All right, we're starting here. I thought it was last. Come on, you made last. So I mean, here's the basic view on this is as a use of land, given where it is on the face. I don't think it's such a bad use. But here's the concern. For the people who live there, the question is, was it reasonably foreseeable for them to think a project like this would be on that land of that size? I've got to tell you, I don't think it was. If you're talking about elsewhere in town, Iron Horse, something like that, yep. But when you look at the impact to the people, if you live near, or if you, like you say, if you live near some railroad tracks, you got to think trains, and you got to think if there's no trains, something else might come in. Where those people bought homes, was it conceivable? Was it in the realm of possibility? Yes. Was it reasonably foreseeable? I would argue it was not. And I think because it was not reasonably foreseeable that a project of scale would go there, there needs to be some kind of extra scrutiny that goes to such a project and some particularly creative ways to approach viewing that, which would go along the lines of really kind of making sure, honestly, my concern is that those people don't suffer economic losses, because your home, for most of us, single largest asset. And I think it is unfair for those people who have invested in this asset to see the value of it drop by, we don't know how much, because quite honestly, real estate's pretty soft around here right now to begin with, potentially significantly. And I really, it concerns me that a project would cause some of our fellow citizens to lose potentially a meaningful portion of what is, in all likelihood, their largest asset. And that doesn't sit well with me. But itself, honestly, I think it might be okay. It might be, I don't know that much about it, but on the face of it, well, clean energy. That's kind of nice. There's no smokestacks. There's no part. We all like solar. My next roof will be a solar roof. My next roof is going to be a roof from Tesla. That will be my next roof. So you might argue, gee, is this really going to be more of a distributed thing? And solar farms themselves, maybe they're not the best investment long term, because at some point in time we're all going to have power plants in our home, whether they're solar or GM. I mean that's a conversation for another time. But I'm really struggling with the fact that this is the inverse of a subsidy, right? People don't get up in arms about peanut subsidies, because if the price of peanut butter goes up 3 cents a jar for you because there's peanut subsidies, who cares? It's hard to get excited about 3 cents. Peanut farmers get really excited about 3 cents a jar That's a ton of money for them. This is the opposite of a subsidy in that there is a general good, but the negative is being disproportionately felt by a small number of people. And when you have disproportionate effects, I think you need to be particularly careful. So I think I would be supportive of the proposed use if it was done in such a way that not every single person, but most of the people who are directly impacted felt, okay, this is reasonable. This is something I could live with.
That's a very clear point of view. I will go next in line and say that I'm not in favor of this project. In fact, I oppose the project in its current location. I am very much in support of solar energy development and wind energy development. But I am not in favor of putting that project where it's being put. And I really object to the power of the state of Connecticut to be able to force it down the throat of this community just because it can. Yes, I agree.
I thought you were for it. I was surprised.
I agree. I agree with Jay's concern for the residents that are there, but as a practical matter, to compensate them and offset this thing is probably not going to be a feasible thing to do. It just doesn't belong in a residential neighborhood. There are other places to put solar energy in the state of Connecticut, plenty of other places, but not in the middle of a residential community. And I think it should be. It should not be approved under any circumstances. However, that's just a point of view of a philosophical, metaphysical point of view. Maybe from an economic development standpoint, I look at it through a different lens, and through the other lens I look at it, I'm just uncomfortable that this project's being forced down our throats, and we don't know if it's the best thing from an economic development standpoint. It hasn't been studied. We haven't looked at other alternatives. It's not right what's happening on many levels, including the potential for economic development. So I'm totally not in favor of it.
And to your point, in terms of the likelihood of doing something, that's, I don't think there's a high likelihood, given the direction that this project has gone thus far, that we will get something that would be palatable to the people who are directly impacted. But in the unlikely event that you did, then I would probably be okay with it.
Jim, just to follow up, if I may, and it was more to Jay's comments that with regards to the impact, and I want to say there's four this may pertain to your discussion. There's the impact of the perception this is a large project in the county, so that's flying at 100,000 feet, that it's new. There's the impact perspective of when I drive down Hoskinson County, I look left and right, I see fields, but I don't live in the neighborhood, but I'm used to looking at fields, and I may look at something different now, whether it's a 10-foot tall vinyl fence or whether it's some other more aesthetically pleasing. I have my profession needs to a 10-foot tall vinyl fence, and that is, it can be done much better than that, and Simsbury deserves more than that, as you have articulated today. There are people who live in the neighborhood that may casually trespass on farmland that they don't own and walk their dogs and enjoy the aesthetics of that farmland. So higher level, it's in the community. I will drive by something different. I live near it but can't see it, but I enjoy the land that I don't own. And the third is that really you've honed in on is there are homes and there's less of them. If you look at the neighborhood as a few hundred homes, there are much fewer that are directly abutting who will see this. And that's the thing. So I think everybody needs to be poignantly clear and I know, Tom, you came back from vacation, that if you look at the project, it is surrounded by residential, but not every single one of those residential homes will be able to see this project. It will be near them, but not visible for them yet. So that's why I think it's in the community, to others' points. You will see it potentially in some form when you drive by it, because your view shed will change north and south of Hoskinson County. If you live directly abutting it, you may be able to see it from your backyard, and that's the direct impact.
Yeah.
And then the perceived impact is it's near you, but you can't see it. It is, yes, it's 290 acres, it's 150 plus acres of solar panels, but not everyone in that residential community will see this from the property.
Yeah, but those who read, the point about putting a project like that in a residential community is not just abutting properties. And it's not whether these abutting properties can see it or can't see it. It's about this is a residential community. And these are residential streets. And these are roads that are used by the residents, not to go from here to Detroit or from here to Boston or anything like that. These are roads that we all use.
It's one pickup a day to maintain it, so one trip a day.
The other thing to quickly
Outside of construction, once the project is up and running, it is one Ford F-150 type vehicle, potentially per day, that will go in and out of this.
I mean, the thing that scares me is apartments go there.
It's not about whether it's maintenance, it's about residents looking at it.
Here's
Well, don't we understand this, that in general, when there's empty property, we run the risk of whatever's going to be built there?
yes.
I mean, isn't that the bottom line here?
Yeah.
Really thinking about it? So, I mean, the only thing we have to think about the negative impact of the residents that live there. But that's the risk they also took, too, when they moved to that area.
Yeah.
So we would like to see some concessions coming back to them, especially those who are truly negatively impacted. But the idea, I think the idea, maybe not, I wouldn't choose that area, but I think it's a great idea and will help here. But it's better than, like you said, another apartment complex or another.
Yeah, that's all it seems people like to build are apartments.
But I'd like to see some kind of concessions, to the residents in that area. That's my thought.
The reason why these parcels were chosen is not because they thought it would be a great idea to put a solar panel there. It's because of the location of a substation.
Oh.
And it is because of the proximity to the substation
Oh.
and the lack of need of lots of cables
The tie-in,
going
yeah.
in and out to tie in. It is, in fact, as far as deep water wind and solar would like us to know and believe, it's the least impactful because of the close proximity of the fairly significant sub-power station.
The impact would be less greater.
And that is that substation's been there for a while, so it's not like the residents didn't know that wasn't there. Did they know that there was going to be a power generator that was going to be plunked down there within the next 5-10 years of their having purchased the property? I would say no, probably not. Foreseeability, however, is only one aspect, and I am a huge proponent of non-fossil fuel energy development. I think that is going to be one of the things that prevents our having waterfront property in the town of Simsbury. When the polar ice caps melt, it will delay that process considerably if we use non-fossil fuels. Is it the best and highest use of farmland? No. Is it the best and highest use for industrial? Arguably no. Is it the best that we have at the moment? Yes.
The best use of that land at the moment.
And it is going to generate income for the town of Simsbury, which the town of Simsbury desperately needs. We just had our mill rate raised to 39.99%. Yikes. anything that we can do to help offset that would be a good thing. Not everything. This, however, I think is a little less impactful than some of the other possibilities. So I would be supportive in general, but I would have some concerns about waiving a more intensive environmental study. I think that that Deepwater Wind Solar has actually, in my scanning of the document at 1 o'clock this morning, I've been practicing for 29 years. I pretty much can read a legal document. What I will tell you, though, is my basic review of it was it made a case for avoiding having a more in-depth environmental impact study being done. I'm not sure it made the case. And while I would support the concept of the solar panel array going into these 5 parcels, I would also support there being careful study being done before they are done so that we can avoid making mistakes and discovering mistakes that will be harder to remediate in the future had this study actually been done.
You know, we are mandated to develop a strategic plan for economic development.
Yep.
And we're about ready to start doing that. I can't imagine, and the land that is available in this community for economic development is limited. There isn't a whole lot of land available for economic development.
Nope.
No.
And if we were doing a strategic plan yesterday, before this project ever came along, and having read the Fairweather report and having read the Plan of Conservation and Development and the other consultant reports we've got, there's never been any mention of solar farms as one of the high
Economic generators.
big strategy
It's a fairly new
strategic things
concept.
for economic development. And I'm and this is bigger than I am. It's probably bigger than this commission. As the state's going to do what the state's going to do, I think. But I just think we have given nowhere near enough thought to the best use of that land going forward. I can think of some really wonderful uses of that land if I sit down and dream what might be good for that land and for this community, including educational institutions, for example, including a small technology park, for example. I mean, there are lots of ways to use that land. Clean economic development. This is pretty clean, this one, but I'm not sure it's the best, so that's why I'm not. That's my fundamental concern with it.
But my question is, how many of these opportunities are coming in to ask about that use of that land?
Well,
They're very few and far between. So I think
they are, but this commission is now, the new Economic Development Commission is going to be a completely different Economic Development Commission with a different mission, a different culture, basically, different resources, and it's going to go out and aggressively do a plan and then try to implement that plan, which this commission has never done before.
I have a question on the proposed on what happens with this electricity that's generated. Is it simply sold to the open market? So basically, how does it work? Could it potentially be a selling point because, hey, we can generate, we can have lower electricity rates for, for other uses of economic development, or gee, we're somewhat off the grid, so we've got some reliable things. If we're talking about, data center backups, if we're talking about other things, but it sounds so. I mean, if it had that component to it, that would also be compelling. But it just kind of sounds like, no, we don't really get any.
What are the facts on
you
that?
can see it. I didn't know it when I read it.
There's no direct
There's not.
local
It goes to the
impact.
grid.
It goes to
It
the
goes
grid.
back to Massachusetts.
It goes to the grid.
Goes to the grid.
I think that's where I sit on this thing. I'm in favor of solar I'm not in favor of solar there in that location. If you think of a location in Simsbury, and I have zero idea whether this is even large enough, but where Simscroft Echo is on Iron Horse right now, very industrial, lots of trucks, lots of noise, lots of machinery there. If that's a location behind a lot of trees and a berm away from a lot of houses, very quiet use.
There's a $30 million project proposed for that site.
I'm just offering an idea of what, to me, would look like a good location for a solar farm, not in the middle of farmland, not in the middle of areas that are going to impact other people. The other issue I have with it is that Massachusetts selected our site for this project. Massachusetts will benefit from the use from that power. Massachusetts will get that power. We won't get any, maybe a small amount. No, wouldn't the residents feel a lot better if that facility were being developed so that Simsbury and its surrounding area would benefit from the power? I think it would have a whole different perspective, especially for the people that live near it.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
I don't wish to be one of those folks that have to deal with that on their property. We have enough dilution in our property values right now to accept that. It's not a lot of revenue for the town, I don't believe, from an economic development point of view. I don't think the town gets really enough of anything out of it, economically, dollar-wise. And what really bugs me is that we stand the chance of not having any ability to affect this decision. I find that incomprehensible.
I agree. I do too.
So, the general consensus seems to be that we like the idea of solar power, but we don't like the idea of solar power there. And that we have concerns about what the overall economic impact would be for the town and the specific economic impact for the abutting property owners.
I have a question. So,
Sir.
who owns this property today?
It's
Industries.
right. And they would be leasing it out to Deepwater.
Selling.
Selling.
Maybe selling.
Oh, they are
Selling
selling
it.
Purchase and sales agreement.
Okay.
Really? I thought it was a lease agreement. Okay.
I have to go back. It's hard because we're covering way too much ground, quite honestly, in far too short a time. So I mean, I keep vacillating back and forth because the other thing you with is, so let's suppose this doesn't happen, and then Griffin sells it to another Silverman, and they put a bunch of apartments up there. I'd wish to God we did the solar farm. I mean, and that's the, and that's the concern is I don't like it for I don't like the plan as it sits for two reasons. One is the disproportionate impact on the abutters. Then more to kind of the points that you made, which is that this isn't even for us. This is for Massachusetts. Like, we can't say we're a solar town. We can't use those panels. Say, you guys should be coming here.
Yeah.
We're off the grid. We've got cheap electricity.
Because that's an attractive
there's a lot of concern about the security of our infrastructure. And okay, here's one big risk you take off the table if you come to Simsbury. So I mean, if we had all that, boy, this is a heck of a lot more compelling. But when we're just generating it and sending it up 84 to the Massachusetts,
That's the problem. David, in your summary, though, you said that one thing, maybe you were going to get there, but there has been a point of view expressed here about the value of $600,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think we need to massage that a little bit more because it's a significant amount of money. To the town. What is the mill rate in effect with $600,000 a year contribution to? What influence does that have on
Maybe
the
a quarter
mill?
mil.
I'm going to try and answer that in a different manner. Because if you look at it as a percentage, or you look at it as a tick point in the mill rate. But again, I have a 10-year-old son, and we tell him, pennies make quarters, quarters make dollars, dollars build your college fund. So if you look at any one project that we'll say just brought $1 million and it had potential implications, if you look at how that breaks down to an individual in town, 23,000 residents, $1 million divided by 23 isn't a lot of money. But if you turn down 10 $1 million projects, that's 10 million. Or if you look at $1 million project over 20 years, that's 20 million. For $1 million, you can finance the finance department, the assessor's office, and the tax office. So incrementally, it adds up. Isolated, it's a different discussion. So you lost money from the Hartford. It was a blip in the mill rate. It may take 3 projects to replace that. So you have to look, I mean, my role as a planning director is I have to look globally at the much larger picture. With regards to the grid, when you turn that light switch on, I can't tell you where that power came from. Millstone, Lisbon's resource reduction facility, Preston's trash to energy, Hartford's, Hydro-Canada. So although this project has ties to Massachusetts, when that light switch goes on, it could be that power. It could be. And if we didn't have power plants, that light switch wouldn't go on. So I know certain projects are tied to certain, Waterford has a nuclear power plant.
Mm-hmm.
Take that offline. Someone's going to have to make up that power. We all want to turn that light switch on. We all want to turn the AC on. Last night after the thunderstorm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, I understand and absolutely respect the implications that there's a Massachusetts component to this project.
And a Rhode Island.
But all of our power that's generated in New England goes grid, including power occasionally from New York and New Jersey, power from Canada.
Yep.
I mean, they're building a larger transmission line to bring more energy in from Hydro-Canada. So we're all kind of on the same team with respect to that. We all need to turn the lights on at some point.
Well, on
I think
the
Mr.
mill rate, Jamie, I know you kind of jumped over that a little bit about what that money would fund. But what is it? It's $600,000 divided by 23,000. I think that works out to 30. That works out to that works out to $30 a year. I think if I did the math right.
And if you ask any resident if you wanted this project for $30, I think the answer would be no. But its implications are much larger than $30 a person, both from an impact perspective and a revenue side. So I absolutely understand what you're struggling with. The only potential suggestion, Mr. Chairman, is I don't know if you could potentially meet in 2 weeks, where you, as the chair, you could take what you heard tonight, try and formulate something, and come back and evaluate kind of that little white paper that you develop, and maybe wordsmith it that night. I don't know if you would feel comfortable making a consensus statement on the commission today.
Well, that's what I was driving at, was to get a sense of the room relative to the general consensus is that the commission would not be opposed to solar energy generation. The commission is concerned, however, of the specific location for this particular project. The other thing that we would need to address, aside from Commissioner Frank's comment about saying something about the $600,000 a year in income, is whether or not we wish to speak to what it is that Deepwater is specifically asking the Siting Council, and that is to waive the necessity of a more in-depth environmental study.
I'm hearing a little bit more from the commission than that, but that was a really good summary. But I'm still hearing some members of the commission say, "Hey, look, it's not a terrible project. some people might get hurt by it, There's no data to suggest that they will, but they might. But it's kind of a clean use of that property and better than other uses that this commission can think of. And so there's some underlying current of approval of this project as a kind of a safe use of that land.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always the devil's in the details. Like that's always the case. Could putting solar somewhere in that thing good? Absolutely. It could also be horrible. I mean, so it's and the thing that's frustrating is, are we getting a corner of a chair of the seat of the table? Maybe-ish. But whatever we're kind of discussing here is not going to be is not going to be influencing enough the direction that this project takes. It seems like it's so far down the line, it's so far baked, and we're so and our involvement is kind of a token. Okay, it's kids table. I mean, let's be honest. But the issues are so fundamental in terms of, well, look, if we were really here and we could really talk about the project, here's the stuff we'd like to do. We'd like to say, all right, let's have video renderings of what this thing looks like, and how about if we shrank it here and then we went through, okay, we're not doing vinyl fences. Here are different types of I mean, if we really got into the details of it, yeah, then maybe we'd be able to. But I don't think we're really going to have the opportunity to add real value to this.
There are still fixed evaluations of the aesthetics of the property online. So the vinyl fence that I mentioned, and the aesthetics and the visual implications from certain locations are shown and information that is readily available to you. And the only thing I'm presenting a suggestion of 2-week delay on is that we'll give some of the members an opportunity to more clearly look at some of the information, or if you had a question of staff regarding something you're reading or seeing or disseminating, we will be available.
Is that in this link?
You see a lot of that in the exhibits. I mean, like there's an awful lot. I mean, I read the 70 pages this morning just so I could be prepared, but there's a lot in those exhibits that do give you visionary and what they plan on doing.
It doesn't give you the video analysis.
Right, but it gives you some kind of concept.
At my request, Silverman did that.
Okay.
A couple things. One is we actually aren't at the little kids table. If, in fact, the siting council grants the town party status, we are on equal footing with the Deepwater, and it's a site better than, no pun intended, intervener status. That would be the little kids table. A party status gives the town the ability to appeal the siting council's decision. That is a big factor that now your appeal power is somewhat limited. The scope of the appeal is going to be limited, but it is still something that an intervener party would not have. To the point of tabling this and having a special meeting in 2 weeks' time, I generally would be in favor of that. Practically speaking, are we going to get a quorum on July 27th?
I think there's a way around that, Dave, because if at this meeting where we do have a quorum, if we could vote to delegate to our vice chairperson the authority to frame and have the confidence in our vice chairperson to frame a statement that takes into account the views that he has heard in this meeting and in another meeting where we don't vote on anything, but we just get together. Anybody that wants to come to the special meeting to give you some further input, we've already voted to give you the authority to write the statement. But maybe it would make sense for us to come together one more time and anybody that has any further thoughts. I feel badly. You've taken the time to prepare, and I'm still on West Coast time. But I'd like to look at the videos. I'd like to look at the exhibits, and I'd like to come back and give you some further input. And if we don't vote on anything in a special meeting, then we're okay with that. Or do we even need a meeting? Could we just send information to you, but vote now to give you the authority to use it as you wish? Can we do that?
Well, we could.
Is that legal?
It's pushing it.
It is pushing it. It is also something that would be determined by the chair. The chair's prerogative being what it is. If you give me the authority to speak on behalf of the present commissioners, that constitutes a quorum, and were to submit further comments within the next 2 weeks, we could have a special meeting scheduled for the 27th. Whether or not we actually would have sufficient quorum to do anything further is kind of up in the air, but I would definitely be circulating what I draft on our behalf well beforehand, so that
we couldn't respond to it.
No, you could respond to Tom, who could then pass on to me the responses.
Okay, well, I'll make a motion. I move that the commission delegate to the current chair, the person in chair, David, the authority to frame a statement that includes the perspectives of the members of this commission, based on what he has heard during this meeting and whatever else he might hear from members of this commission over the next 2 weeks.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And earlier in your discussion, you were, leaning towards, well, can we just formulate a list of questions we want answered throughout the process? And I would encourage you to include that as well. Any additional information or studies or any questions you have that you want either Deepwater or the Siting Council to explore further throughout the process, I would put that in there too, and then
Yep.
that way
Okay. Let's get Chris back.
I'd be curious to see if there's ever a way that some of that energy that's being provided from there comes back to the town somehow, that would input or impact future and potential.
I don't think we'd be sitting here with
Go and distribute directly to.
Well, just not
Really?
being so
There's a law
specific,
that
but or
prohibits
something,
that?
there's a benefit, which would be attraction.
I don't think we'd be having the same discussion if
Right.
that energy were coming back to the
Somehow.
town.
It'd be a nice attraction for future businesses.
Powers complex, but you can't run it to those.
Or just to the town. Could they do that percentage to the town? Because it'd be a great economic impact for future potential businesses. Manufacturing?
Typically solar per kilowatt cost.
Call me Gib.
higher rate.
Really?
What you can invest.
Never knew that. That's interesting.
The cheapest is
Yeah, this is
gonna
the
lower
cost per kilowatt for solar energy is much greater.
Right.
coal, then coal.
Yeah, I never knew that. My husband works for a utility company.
Liquid oil.
Not every one, but
So I'm back.
For all of your benefit, we do have a page on our website. It's simsbury-ct.gov /Deepwater. It's a normal website /Deepwater, and it's got a bunch of materials. And it's also with a link to the petition to the Siting Council page, which they're very good at keeping that up to date. So for more information for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so welcome back, Chris.
yeah, welcome back.
I don't know what was discussed after the Deepwater piece of it, but I know many of us have to get to work. I don't know if we want to continue with the agenda or
Move to adjourn.
That was enough,
if
right?
we want to propose having these two items that are very important for us as a commission to discuss, because we have a report due back to the Selectman's office regarding the new NEDC of having a special meeting in 2 weeks, potentially, to just talk about this, because it's 9 o'clock, and some of you, myself included, have work obligations. So what are your thoughts on that?
Those two agenda items, I feel, can be reviewed at the August meeting.
We can do the August meeting?
August, that's fine.
Everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so do I have a motion to move those two items to the...
Move to table those items until the August.
Do I have a second?
I'll
EDC
second.
meeting.
Third.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn the
Well,
meeting?
let's vote on.
Okay, let's vote on
the.
Are we all in favor of moving those two items?
Yes.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're good.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Aye. Aye.